So it's week 9, and we're under ordinary circumstances we would have had a lecture by a paralegal talking about tips for new paralegals, but this is an unusual time, as we know. So I'm going to do my best after having looked at the resources that I've put online in the course content at some of these tips that are in these two articles. It really all boils down to organization, like we have said before. And lawyers are generally poorly organized, and they are generally procrastinators. That's something that comes through in that article. I think it is due to the nature of the schooling they go to, where for 7 years, undergraduate plus law school, you live by deadlines. When is it due? So then you roll yourself out into a profession that is driven by the same thing. When is it due? And that just leads to putting a date on the calendar, and rather than working steadily, you realize, well, that's when it's due. I'll work on it that day, and that becomes a habit. Well, one of the things a paralegal can do is help the lawyer break that habit if it's possible, and if not, work towards having as much of the groundwork that the paralegal can do on a project done for when the lawyer feels the sense of urgency to get on the project. So that's not an ideal situation, but it's often the way people's personalities are in the legal profession. That's why some of these tips tell you to anticipate lawyers' disorganization and procrastination. One thing that I think is something that sort of emanates out of all these organizational tips is the idea of routine. As it happens in the COVID-19 oddity that we live in, what has kept me marginally sane is routine. I have the luxury of coming to work because I work in a small office, primarily with my wife and my son, who is part-time here, and then another lawyer who is here, and it just is a limited number of people. So I've had that ability to come to work, that routine, and that's taught me that routine keeps you grounded in challenging times, and in ordinary times that are intermittently challenging. Certainly there is a role for routine as a means of keeping yourself on task, certainly, and making the workload manageable, not overwhelming you, the person in the center of the storm. One of the things that just jumped out at me as so true to life, maybe the most practical piece of advice in these practical tips, is to never put anything on a lawyer's desk. Not because we're territorial about our space or whatever, but because we are capable of losing things, and we're not plugged into the intake processing and end processing process. Things go to a lawyer's desk to get marooned. So if you need something brought to the attention of the lawyer, it's best to bring it yourself, or in a if there's a way to impose order, so to speak, on the way the lawyer is organizing his workspace, her workspace, have a place where things that the lawyer is supposed to see goes. And that's all that goes in that box or that rack or that file stand or whatever. So that's just some suggestions about how to make up for the fact that you can't simply place something on a lawyer's desk or chair or something and hope that they see it and tend to it promptly or on the schedule that you hope for. Now, that is driven also by that the need not to do that is driven by the fact that lawyers often come in with a real agenda, like the first thing I'm going to do is some particular item, and the next, and my morning is going to be dedicated to whatever. So something on the desk interrupting that is supposed to interrupt that and get the attention of the lawyer for a moment, may or may not work. So bring drafts or bring things that a lawyer is supposed to look at, like what do you want me to do about this letter, what do you want me to do with this notice from the court or something like that, and just simply say, here it is, let's deal with it right now. And if now is not a convenient time, say, all right, can I bring it back in an hour? What about right after lunch? Something like that. And deal with it then rather than marooning it on their desk to get lost or whatever. So anyway, that seems like a long time to talk about that, but it's very important. And as I stated, it just jumped, that jumped out at me. One says never put anything on a lawyer's desk. The other article says don't put any original on the lawyer's desk. And that just jumped out at me as being so practical. So one of the things that you can do to prompt a lawyer, if they will discipline themselves, is to look at using Clio or some other method that will assign a lawyer a task, like review a document, and you can attach that document to that reminder or that notice. Clio is set up to do that. I have my assigned task or whatever down to 1 today, and that is the best way of getting things to a lawyer's attention if they'll discipline themselves, and it doesn't involve clutter or losing something on the desk. So look for those tools as a means of working through the sort of constant struggle of getting the lawyer to have a flow whereby they review and look at things. So the another tip that stuck out to me was number 9 on the first article: label like a madman. Make things identifiable. Get one of those fancy label makers, whatever, that will allow you to sort of over label and over organize. I'd rather have a file with one piece of paper in it than that piece of paper be lost somewhere where its identification is sketchy. Like maybe it belongs there, maybe it doesn't. Just put it in its own file. Same is true for electronic files. I'd rather have too many than too few. So this goes along with this labeling and organizing goes along with another thought that I see expressed elsewhere in here. begin the trial notebook almost immediately. We've talked about that before, but if you begin that quality of organization, it's something that will be underway when preparation gets really intense. You won't be starting from scratch for that kind of organization and taming some large and sprawling case. I look at this tip about proofreading. You know that spell check, whatever, will never replace actual proofreading, because spell check will check for misspelled words, and there are plenty of examples of where a correctly spelled word but the wrong word is in a document. There are grammar checkers, and use those. If you see something with a red line under it or whatever, pay attention to that and ask what might be the problem with that sentence. Subject verb agreement, pronoun antecedent, something like that. Pronoun cases, plurals, plural possessives, things that just get done, there, THEIR versus THERE, or some usage issue. Befriend court staff. Absolutely get to know those people and treat them like they are somewhere in the aristocracy, because they are. A judge's judicial assistant, which is the term for secretary, is of utmost importance. They're the gatekeeper for the judge. They're clerks. The people in the clerk's office are people that if they like you, they'll go out of their way to help you. If, on the other hand, they don't, they will not be so eager to help and might obstruct. You don't know what kind of personalities you're dealing with until you cross somebody, and so always, that just goes along with that ethos of knowing the janitor's name as well as the CEO's name. Where everybody, if you want to be valued, set the tone and value everybody, whether they're the ones who sign the checks or the ones who take out the trash and buff the floors. There's just no way that doesn't help you in ways you can't anticipate. This thing about take good notes, yes, and if you can use an app like Evernote, if you're using a scratch pad, then go and put that note in a more permanent setting. It's best that if you do that, you won't be looking for a scrap of paper somewhere. If you have a notebook that you carry, whether that be something like a journal or something like this that I use, or something in my desk that is smaller, like a book like this. Just have something where that if a note is taken, it's in that book, or it's online, and eventually you would want to have everything online, which would be therefore accessible wherever. So Evernote, OneNote, Simple Note, those apps. OneNote, I think, comes with Microsoft Office. Evernote is a little bit more sophisticated. I like it, and have used it for a number of years. So take good and thorough notes of conversations and certainly client interviews and those sorts of things that you're participating in. All right, the the things that I would talk about also in closing is there being no such thing as a stupid question, and the let's face it, there are such things as stupid questions, but ask them anyway. Okay, be vulnerable enough to ask a question that you don't know anything about, because number one, it's honest, it gets the work done better and more efficiently, it gets it done right the first time, that sort of thing. And number two, it's the only way you learn. I have a very embarrassing story that I won't tell you, but I'll just say that my first appearance in criminal court some 25 years ago was less than successful. I made a mistake that made my colleagues chuckle at me. It wasn't a mistake that couldn't be corrected on the spot, but that was embarrassing and I got laughed at. But you know what? I learned something and I lived as proof that I'm sitting here today. It didn't kill me to get exposed a little bit. An ego is a useful thing if it drives you to succeed. It is a destructive thing if it keeps you from realizing limitations and so forth. Keep that attitude of the more you know, the more you ought to be aware of what you don't know. One of the things about being in a field that is involves expertise is that if, or at least for me, the longer I've been a lawyer, the more I realize there's so very much I don't know at all. I have no idea what an engineer does on a more or less daily basis. Maybe there is an exception that I know a thing or two about civil engineering because I've had a background in the Navy in surveying and that kind of stuff. And my best high school friend is a civil engineer and surveyor. All right, maybe I know a few things about that, but the people who work in aerospace and electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, I know nothing about what they do. Okay, so all I'm saying is the older I get, the more I realize what I don't know, and I hope that attribute stays with me when I'm like really old, not just in my 50s, but consciously aware that the world is bigger and more complicated. All that little excursion is to say, ask the questions. It will make you grow professionally, personally, and otherwise. All right. Perhaps the last thing I want to say is, the comment I will leave you with is to take care of yourself, and if that's, however you do that, make sure that you get plenty of rest, you eat right, exercise, that kind of stuff, because stress and wear and tear is cumulative, and the time, and I'm preaching to the choir here, if you don't have time to exercise, that's your signal that you need it worse than ever, more than ever. So this job inevitably involves long hours, but unless you're being compensated adequately for it, don't just get into a routine of working longer hours than, say, a 9 to 5 work day. don't get in the habit of working weekends, be accessible perhaps for an emergency. But if you wanted the stress and time demands of a job like a lawyer's, I think you would have become a lawyer. One of the reasons people go into the work of a paralegal or work in a clerk's office or court stenographer, that kind of stuff, is they don't want to be where the buck stops. They've not bought into that sort of demanding, super demanding lifestyle that, frankly, a lot of lawyers will just get out of once they realize what it's like and how it can be taxing and stressful and demoralizing at times. So take care of you. Lawyers are anxious and stressed out people. If you can be a calming influence, do that, but certainly don't put yourself in a situation where the stress and demands of a lawyer's job ratchet you up into an anxious, nervous situation. Some of that's unavoidable, but be conscious of it and, make your situation livable long term. There are times when a lawyer's job, a paralegal's job, legal secretary's job, whatever, gets to be intense. But there should be sort of peaks and valleys, not just the stress of combat day after day after day. Okay, so that is my concluding comment to this lecture is the importance of taking care of yourself. Notice I started with organization, that's the most important, and then equally important is what I say at the end. And so, read those tips over, internalize them, think them over. They are the grist for response papers and the discussion this week. If you have any questions about any of the assignments, please let me know. And we will look forward to seeing you with another unit of material next week. I will say one more thing. This Saturday, Blackboard Ultra, Collaborative Ultra, that's going to be about questions you have and some projection about what I think will and should be on the final. But if you can make that, fine. If not, just get with somebody who has the availability. But I just wanted to have that one live interactive questioning experience. Watch your announcements in case something changes about that. Okay, thank you. Goodbye.